When it comes to learning medical terminology and committing it to long-term memory, it can be so fun, so fulfilling, so rewarding, and not boring and tedious. Now, I see a lot of mnemonic examples out there that are okay, and some of them are actually pretty good, but in each and every case that I've seen, they can be better by adding elements that I call magnetic. This is Dr. Anthony Metivier from magneticmerrymethod.com to celebrate this being the first video on this channel about medical mnemonics and mnemonics for anatomy, for phlebotomy, for pharmacology, for everything related to healing the human body. I've got a couple of copies to give away of the second edition of my best-selling book, How to Learn and Memorize Medical Terminology. So, more details on that in a minute. Let's get into some of my best tips for learning medical terminology. So the first thing that I would suggest is that you personalize your journey and organize everything yourself. A lot of people, they download Anki decks and they come to me and they say, well, I've got all these Anki decks and I looked at all the cards X amount of times and I still can't remember anything. It's all too abstract and so forth. Well, one of the reasons why is that when you download a deck, you are robbing yourself of what scientists of memory call active recall. And active recall has a couple of components. Personalization and variety are two that we're going to talk about today. There's a little bit more to it than that, but just to keep it simple, personalization and variety really come down to making it your own, organizing it by yourself. So make your own cards. This is a huge suggestion, and then organize them in particular ways. So why is this personalized? Well, it's not just personalized because I wrote it with my own hand. That's called haptic memory, using your own hands. Very, very powerful. And of course, you can always take photographs of your cards and then put them in an Anki deck, and you'll get that advantage because you created it yourself and you personalized it. But it's also personalized because if you see here, you have hypotension on this card for low blood pressure, and there's some elements here. So that 10 is also making me think of a Pearl Jam album, which, has a very important reference to 10 in it. The arrow is going down, and it's a hypodermic needle. Now, I'm also thinking of a couple of things that we'll talk about in a second to personalize it even further, but this is very, very powerful. And the other thing that personalizes it is it's going into a memory palace. Now, in this case, it's an H memory palace, all based on the principle of the alphabetical memory palace. So what that means is you have a memory palace network, A to Z, 26 memory palaces, one for each letter of the alphabet, and eventually more. There are some people who have hundreds, if not thousands, of memory palaces. Just to keep this very, very simple and direct, a memory palace is an imaginative recreation of a building that you're familiar with, or many buildings. You can use outdoor elements on the streets and so forth. You can use walls like the ones that are behind me. Any wall in any building. And what you do is you just mentally place or tether or stick or otherwise associate those ideas in the memory palace. You can stick them on walls, you can place them on furniture, you can put them under tables. You can do all kinds of things in memory palaces, but just imagine that this hypodermic needle here is right here, just floating in space. And maybe there's a book here by Hermann Hesse, and Hermann Hesse, of course, starts with H. So we're using this alphabetical method to help maximize recall while personalizing it each and every step of the way. Now, the next tip that I have for you is to go a little bit further. And we want to dimensionalize everything. We want to have multi-sensory mnemonics, deepen them. So Cave Cogs is a formula for doing that. And what this means is kinesthetic, auditory, visual, emotional, conceptual, olfactory, gustatory, and spatial. So to give you a couple examples of kinesthetic, if we have Hermann Hesse here, H, and he's got hypotension, we want to feel what it's like to put this hypodermic needle into his arm, like literally as if we were putting it into him. Or we could be him and feel what it's like to receive that needle. We can hear the sounds, which is auditory. We can see what it looks like, which is visual. Then we could imagine the emotion. Oh, I'm so emotional because I'm Hermann Hesse and I have this problem with hypotension, and all that sort of stuff. Now, conceptual, you could think of the genre that Hermann Hesse wrote in and all that sort of thing. Don't worry if you don't know who I'm talking about with Hermann Hesse and all this sort of stuff. You probably know someone or something that can help you remember these things. Maybe a person named Harvey, for example, or if you're in a country that has Harvey's restaurant, that sort of thing. You can use that kind of concept, like fast food restaurant, to help you dimensionalize things and use the alphabetical method. The next thing you want to do is you want to contextualize your mnemonics. So, you got hypotension, and then you connect it with hypertension, and you can connect it with all kinds of symptoms, medicines, and so forth to really deepen it and use the letter to apply it to a person. So again, I think of Hermann Hesse immediately for this, but there could be many, many people that you would think of. For example, Howie Mandel would be another H, or maybe Howard Stern would be another one. And you could just go on and on and on. This is really, really great practice. And if you want a simple way to practice, just get some cards like these cards here and have H, A to Z, H, and you could just think, okay, so H, and who else could you do? Harry Truman, all that sort of stuff, right? And you could just endlessly have associations for H, and you practice. So every time you look at your A card, you come up with 3 to 5 A's. Every time you do your B card, 3 to 5 B's, etc. Along with this, let me give you a little bonus tip as well. When I make my cards, I don't have answers on the back like you've just seen. So I have to solve the puzzle. This is part of active recall. So I have to look at it, and I have to think, okay, so what was I trying to learn here? And I have, okay, so the down arrow, what is that telling me? Oh, low blood pressure. What's this 10 telling me? Oh, that must be part of the word, hypotension. And this is a great way to train yourself to really form memories very, very quickly. The next thing that I would suggest that you do is, we've so far talked about using your mind a lot for associations when you're learning medical terminology, but also use your body. So this is Rose Swed. She was on the Magnetic Memory Method Masterclass. She's a nurse. She was really struggling to learn phlebotomy. And what she did is she started to use arms of celebrities as her mnemonic device. So as a kind of body memory palace. This helped her figure out what she needed to do very, very quickly. So it's not just about using your mind, but you can also use your own body or the bodies of celebrities to place associations on as kinds of memory palace. If you want more detail about that, I'll put the link to this podcast episode in the description below, and you can check that out on the Magnetic Memory Method blog. The next thing that I have for you is proper spaced repetition. Now, there's many ways to do spaced repetition. You can use flashcards, you can use software, etc. But when you're using the Memory Palace, there's an even better way. So imagine you have a bunch of information in a Memory Palace, like we've just talked about hypotension here or there in the Memory Palace. Let's say you have a bunch of medical terms that start with the letter H that you've all collected into one memory palace. What you want to do is navigate that memory palace in a particular set of orders. So in order to give primacy and recency, it's called in memory science, the most amounts of benefit, you travel the memory palace forward and backward, and you also go from the middle to the beginning, the middle to the end. And then if you really want to go for gold, you skip the stations. So if hypotension is on station 1 and hypertension is on station 3, then you're going to go from 1 to 3, and then whatever's on 5, and then by the time you get to 10, you're going to go backwards on the evens. So 10, 8, 6, 4, 2. I know that sounds a little bit abstract, but once you try it a couple of times and you see the effects, you'll realize that you are learning information a lot faster, and the memory science tells us why. It's very old memory science from Hermann Ebbinghaus. He's the guy who came up with spaced repetition through serial positioning and primacy effect, recency effect, and he did it all to figure out how we could defeat the forgetting curve. So we want to do that. And basically, if you look here, this is an example from one of my students. He drew his memory palace, which is very, very powerful and important to do. And then in order to remember something like the optic nerve and the olfactory nerve, he's got Oscar Peterson and a tick, optic, and this is a very, very specific mnemonic. And this old person here is probably supposed to be Gary Oldman, if memory serves. So Oldman at a factory, and then you have olfactory. And you just fill up the memory palace and away you go, and you use those proper spaced repetition strategies. You'll get all this information into long-term memory a lot faster. Also, in the case of various nerves, cranial nerves, you can use the skull itself as a kind of memory palace, but often because you want to be able to add information, it's a little bit better to have it in a standard memory palace like we've been talking about. But there's multiple options, and when you use the body memory palace, you can also use multiple bodies for the different cranial nerves in that particular case. Now, before we get into these contest details, if you're enjoying this, you're finding it useful, hit that thumbs up. And let me know in the comments why you want to learn medical terminology and anything you would like to see further on the channel. And if you would like some free stuff that will help you learn this even more, go to the link down below. It will take you to this written version of the video now, and then this pop-up will come up and I'll get you the ultimate list of medical mnemonics. You're going to love it. It's just many, many mnemonic examples, more than we've gone through today, for a variety of learning outcomes in the field of medicine. To this contest, if you want to be eligible for a free copy of this book, please let me know in the comments why you want to learn medicine, or if you're a doctor already, where you're at with your memory and how that having more advanced mnemonics like we've talked about today would help you in your career. And substantial answers are favored. You don't have to say, oh, Anthony, you're so great and I love you and all that sort of stuff, which I sometimes see when I do contests. As nice as that is, I don't judge it based on kind words. I base it on the substance of your answer, the thought that you put into it. And this book is very, very valuable for those who get it. Okay, so before we go, one more tip for you, which is something I've already intuited here, is to use your own drawings, because this gives you that haptic memory. And think about how that you can do it in such a way that you're going to remember what's going on here. So in this particular case, I just have to look at this and I just start to think, okay, so who is this and what is all these blue lines all about? Well, one of them is an actor named Justin Long. He's glaring at Geena Davis. So what's that all about? Well, Clarigen is one of these drugs for insulin. It's this drug. Now, I've only just learned this, and I may have made a little bit of a mistake there, but at the end of the day, Clarigen, that's coming to my mind, and I think it's quite close to correct, and it is one of the long action insular drugs, right? And speaking of the insulin drugs that I'm only just now memorizing, I'm helping out a student. I've made a whole video all about the insulin drugs and how to memorize them. So I'm going to show you how to memorize the types, how to memorize the different onset, peak time, and the duration related to them, which I myself am doing. And, I've got to go and check that. That's part of the learning process, is self-testing, which is another huge tip for you, is constantly be self-testing. I'll go and see if Clarigen is even remotely correct. And I think it is in the long acting because I have this image. And I'm pretty sure that guy on the left that I drew is Justin Long, to help me remember that it belongs in there. And so in this video, I'm going to take this further, show you how to make a memory palace like this, and then think about how to memorize those numbers using a very, very special memory strategy, which is called the number shape method. And I'll talk about some other more advanced and robust number methods as well that you're going to want to know about as part of your medical journey. Thank you so much. And until we have a chance to speak again, keep yourself magnetic.